Dinner at Stonebridge Grill was warm yellow lights and the clatter of silverware like hail on glass. My stepmother, Helene, leaned in, smelling of rich amber, and struck me hard across the cheekbone, directly under the ceiling camera's unflinching eye. I wiped the blood, triggered the audio recorder on my watch, and whispered, "Thank you for the timestamp." My father just sighed. "She's trying her best." He didn't know I write the covenants for people who believe they are above them. My name is Mara Quinn. I am 32 years old, and I was sitting in the private dining room of the Stonebridge Grill in Marrow Creek, a place designed to make money feel comfortable. It was a Friday night, the air thick with the scent of seared scallops and the low, confident hum of business being done. The walls were paneled in dark, glossy wood that drank the light, and the single Calder-esque mobile hanging from the ceiling turned slowly, a silent, metallic predator. I was seated across from my stepmother, Helene, to my right, my father, Graham Quinn, CEO of Grayvale Systems, swirled a burgundy in his glass, his gaze fixed on the vortex as if it held the answers to the market's Q3 anxieties. This dinner was billed, in a terse text from my father's assistant, as a family healing opportunity, a ludicrous premise. We weren't a family in need of healing. We were a corporate entity in need of a clean narrative. On Monday morning, Grayvale Systems was set to finalize a 9-figure green bond issuance, a deal I had spent 18 months structuring. The underwriters, a notoriously conservative firm from Zurich, valued public perception above all else. A united family front, a portrait of heartland stability, was considered a non-negotiable asset. Hence, the dinner, Helene, in a silk blouse the color of clotted cream, was the very picture of the supportive corporate spouse. I was the prodigal but brilliant legal counsel, the daughter from the first marriage, now an indispensable part of the machine. My father was the patriarch, the steady hand on the tiller. It was all a carefully constructed, beautifully lit lie. The conversation was a sterile ballet of approved topics, the surprisingly robust performance of industrial software in a volatile market, the tasteful renovation of the Marrow Creek Art Center, a project Helene chaired, the weather. Every word was polished, every sentence a dead end. Helene recounted an anecdote about a clumsy caterer at a recent gala, her laughter a little too sharp, her eyes holding mine a second too long. My father nodded, his smile a tired, practice thing. He hated conflict more than he hated losses, and in his world, the two were often intertwined. A young waiter, his face a smooth mask of professional deference, approached to pour the second bottle of wine. He moved with a quiet efficiency that was the restaurant's hallmark. As he leaned between Helene and me, his body momentarily obscuring the view, Helene's elbow shot out, a hard, bony point that dug viciously into my ribs. The gasp of air I took was sharp, involuntary. Before I could process the sudden, blinding pain, her left hand came across the table. It wasn't a wild swing, but a controlled, precise strike. The crack of her palm against my cheekbone was shockingly loud in the hushed room. It sounded like a dry branch snapping. The waiter froze, the neck of the bottle hovering over my glass, his eyes wide with a terror he was paid to suppress. My head snapped to the side. For a moment, the world was a high-pitched ringing and the hot metallic taste of blood in my mouth where my teeth had cut the inside of my cheek. I turned back slowly. Helene's face was serene, her lips curved into a faint, triumphant smile. She hadn't even spilled her wine. My father's hand was halfway to my arm before he seemed to think better of it and let it fall back to the table. My gaze lifted, bypassing them both, and settled on the small, black dome of the security camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling. A tiny, ruby-red LED pulsed steadily. 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. It reflected in the polished surface of my water glass, a tiny, winking star of confirmation. I had personally reviewed the service agreement Grayvale's corporate accounts division held with the Stonebridge Grill. Clause 9b-2. high-resolution color video retention for a minimum of 90 days for all private dining suites. "Don't make a scene, Mara," my father breathed, his voice a low, urgent hiss. He didn't look at me. He looked at the waiter, who was now backing away, stammering apologies for an intrusion that was not his fault. "For God's sake, she's trying her best." Trying her best. The phrase echoed in the space where a filial defense should have been. It was the epitaph of my childhood, the justification for every forgotten birthday, every broken promise, every casual cruelty Helene had ever dispensed under the guise of parenting. I picked up the heavy linen napkin from my lap. It was cool and crisp against my skin. I brought it to my mouth and dabbed delicately at the corner of my lip, then looked at the small, perfect red bloom on the white fabric. Evidence. I folded it neatly and placed it beside my plate, with my left hand, still under the table. I double-tapped the side of my watch. A faint vibration confirmed it. The microphone was active, the recording app running. I angled my wrist slightly, letting the watch face point toward Helene. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, a silken thread of venom meant only for me. "You think you're so clever, don't you? With your clauses and your contracts, you pull one more stunt like you did in the board meeting, and I will personally tell every reporter in this state that you're unstable. I will destroy you, you little bitch. Your father will believe me. He always does." I let her finish, the tiny microphone capturing every syllable. The ambient noise of the restaurant a perfect, legally admissible backdrop. I made no reply. Instead, I caught the eye of the floor manager, a man named Albright, who was now hovering anxiously by the door. I gave him a small, reassuring nod, and he approached the table, his face a mess of professional concern. "Is everything all right here, Ms. Quinn?" he asked, his voice low. "Everything is fine, thank you, Mr. Albright," I said. My voice was calm, steady. It was the same tone I used to dictate memos on regulatory compliance. "There was a minor incident. I need you to do something for me. Please ensure that all CCTV footage from this room, as well as the main dining hall and the entrances, from 7:00 p.m. this evening, is isolated and preserved. Do not delete it. I'll have a formal litigation hold notice sent to your corporate office by 9:00 a.m. tomorrow." Albright's eyes darted from my face to Helene's, then to my father's stony profile. He was a man who understood power dynamics. He simply nodded. "Of course, Ms. Quinn, consider it done." He retreated. The spell of the evening was irrevocably broken. The food, a beautifully plated arrangement of pan-seared duck breast, sat untouched, growing cold. The silence was thick and heavy. "I believe we're finished here," I said, pushing my chair back. My father reached for his wallet. "I'll get this." "No," I said, holding up a hand. "Allow me." From my purse, I produced a specific credit card. It was black, with the Grayvale Systems logo embossed in silver. In the bottom right corner, it read, "Legal, M. Quinn." I handed it to the waiter, who had reappeared, his composure regained. "Please bring the detailed receipt back to the table." This act was crucial. It transformed a private family dinner into a documented corporate expense. The receipt, with its timestamp and itemized list, would now be uploaded into Grayvale's digital expense tracking system, creating an indelible, auditable link between the company, this restaurant, and the events of this evening. It was no longer a domestic dispute. It was a corporate liability event. When the waiter returned, I signed the slip, added a generous tip, it wasn't his fault, and stood up. I placed the folded, blood-stained napkin carefully into my purse. Then I looked at my father and my stepmother, who were watching me as if I were a stranger. I allowed myself a small, tight smile. It didn't reach my eyes. "This dinner was very productive," I said, my voice even. "Thank you both. Tomorrow will be even more so." I turned and walked out of the room without looking back, my heels clicking a steady, resolute rhythm on the polished marble floor. The cold night air hit me as I stepped outside, a welcome shock to my system. I didn't need to look at my cheek in a mirror. I could feel the bruise already forming, a deep, satisfying ache. It was a physical record of a signed contract, and I was the one who had written all the terms. The drive from Stonebridge Grill to my high-rise apartment in the renovated warehouse district was 20 minutes of cold, quiet control. The adrenaline from the restaurant was ebbing, leaving behind the steady, rhythmic throb in my cheekbone. It was a physical sensation I focused on, a grounding point. It was real, tangible, and most importantly, time-stamped. In the sterile blue-white glow of the streetlights, I could see my reflection in the dark windshield, the faint, rising discoloration, the tightness in my jaw. I looked exactly like what I was, a data point. To the outside world, Grayvale Systems is a monolith. The business journals call us the Heartland's industrial software empire, a titan of logistics, agriculture, and heavy manufacturing tech. We are the clean, reliable, American-made engine behind the things that make the country run. Our branding is flawless: brushed steel, deep greens, and images of vast, golden wheat fields managed by our proprietary autonomous tractors. We are stability. We are the future. We are a lie. And at the center of that lie, smiling brilliantly for the cameras, is Helene. Helene is not an engineer. She is not a logistician. She is not a financier. She is my father's second wife, and her official, embossed on a business card title is Chief Corporate Culture Advisor. It's a role she invented, and one my father ratified because it gave her a budget and a platform. Her job, as far as I can discern, is to be seen. She thrives in the flashbulb's glare, her hand always on my father's arm, her head tilted at a perfect, adoring 45-degree angle. She is the soft, human face of a ruthless machine, the company's designated philanthropist, the one who cuts ribbons at hospitals and accepts plaques at $10,000 a plate charity galas. She is, in short, the living, breathing embodiment of our public relations department. Our family portrait is a standing feature in the annual Midwest Business Families of Influence issue. You know the one. The setting is always our family estate, a sprawling, joyless piece of architecture that tries too hard to look like an old-world manor. We are arranged around a 20-foot mahogany dining table that is only ever used for photo shoots. The centerpiece is always a massive, suffocating arrangement of hydrangeas, which Helene is, ironically, violently allergic to. Her smile in those photos is a marvel of modern dentistry and sheer willpower, a frozen, lacquered thing that never, ever reaches her eyes. My father stands behind her, his hand on her shoulder, his expression one of benign, patriarchal pride, and I am there, usually seated at the end of the table, my hands folded, my smile a tight, contractual obligation. What those photos don't capture is the reality that precedes them. They don't hear Helene, minutes before the photographer arrives, hissing at me in the dressing room. "Mara, dear." A look of respect. Filial piety photographs beautifully. Try to look less analytical. They don't capture her constant, low-level campaign to sand down my edges, to make me a more palatable accessory. When the reporter from Forbes asks you about your work, she'd instruct, don't talk so much about the legalese, indemnification clauses, and compliance protocols. It just confuses people. Tell them you help steward the family vision. It's warmer. I grew up in a house where silence was the only acceptable solution to conflict. Image was not just important. It was the only truth. My mother, the brilliant, volatile engineer who co-founded the company with my father, was erased from the corporate history within a year of her death because her narrative was too complex. Helene's narrative, in contrast, was perfect. The beautiful, supportive wife who tamed the grieving widower and helped him build his legacy, in the Quinn household, and by extension at Grayvale. If something was ugly, you didn't fix it, you just painted over it and commissioned a better portrait. This philosophy extended deep into the corporate structure. Every time an executive-level scandal threatened to breach the walls, an embezzlement claim in the logistics division, a whistleblower report of safety violations, a sexual harassment suit against a top sales director, Helene would swing into action. Her solution was never accountability. It was brunch. She would organize what she called a corporate healing brunch for the senior leadership. Over mimosas and truffle-infused quiche, she would give a heartfelt speech about the pressures of rapid growth and the unfortunate but understandable human frailties that emerge. The problem, she would insist, wasn't the individual's lack of ethics. It was that the company was too successful, too driven. She'd frame felony-level misconduct as a side effect of ambition, and the board, desperate to avoid a stock-damaging investigation, would eat it up. The problem would be handled with a quiet resignation, a generous severance package, and a non-disclosure agreement so restrictive it bordered on unconstitutional. My father, Graham Quinn, allowed this because he fears disruption more than he values truth. He is a man who loves the comfortable, warm glow of a plausible lie more than the cold, bracing bath of reality. He built an empire on ruthless efficiency and predictive analytics, yet he cannot stand to ask a single hard question about his own home or his own leadership team. He detests any conversation that veers toward the legal or the ethical. To him, those aren't pillars of good business. They are annoying, expensive roadblocks to his vision. He needs Helene's gloss paint. He needs her ability to reframe corporate malfeasance as a minor social faux pas. It absolves him of the responsibility to act. I didn't choose a career in compliance law because I have a deep and abiding love for the Federal Register. I didn't go to law school to argue grand ideas of justice. I went because I needed a different language. In a family that communicates in subtext, PR spin, and strategic silence, I needed a language of cold, hard, undeniable fact. I needed a language that could trample sentiment. I needed a language that could bind them. They see my work as the boring, tedious plumbing of the company. They don't realize that the person who controls the plumbing controls the entire building. I didn't want to win an argument with them. I wanted to foreclose on them. I wanted to tie them up so tightly with their own words, their own contracts, their own signatures, that the moment they violated a single rule, the entire structure I'd built would snap shut on them. For the past 2 years, that is exactly what I have been doing. My official project was the Grayvale 2030 Ethics Framework Update, a dull, bureaucratic title for a complete re-engineering of the company's internal governance. Working late, long after the executives had gone home, I began meticulously rewriting the code that governed us. I embedded new, stronger ethics clauses into every vendor contract. I rewrote the bad actor provisions in our executive employment agreements. I updated the whistleblower protections, and most critically, I worked directly with the underwriters on the new green bond offering. It's amazing what you can get approved when you bury it in a 400-page bond prospectus. They were all so focused on the interest rates, the maturity dates, and the ESG marketing points that no one, not our outside counsel, not the board, not my father, paid close attention to the covenants. Specifically, Appendix D, Section 14.6, Material Adverse Change, MAC, due to integrity breach. A clause I wrote myself. It was a beautiful piece of legal architecture. It defined an integrity breach as, among other things, any verifiable act of violence or moral turpitude committed by a key person or influential related party that could expose the company to significant reputational or legal risk. Helene, with her Chief Corporate Culture Advisor contract and her status as the CEO's spouse, was explicitly named as an influential related party. The clause was a loaded gun, locked away in the most boring file cabinet in the company. It needed 2 things to fire: an irrefutable, documented event, and a trigger. I got home and walked into my bathroom. The lighting was harsh, fluorescent, unforgiving. I leaned into the mirror. The bruise was magnificent. It was blooming in shades of purple and red. A clear, distinct map of Helene's knuckles and palm across my cheekbone. It was undeniable. All my work, all those thousands of hours drafting and redrafting, had been theoretical. I had built a complex machine of consequences, but it required a key. Tonight, at Stonebridge Grill, under the watchful, recording eye of that ceiling camera. Helene didn't just strike me. She didn't just assault the company's chief compliance counsel. She took that key, put it in the lock, and turned it. She signed for me, not with a pen, but with the flat of her hand, and the clock was now ticking. My official title at Grayvale Systems is Chief Compliance Counsel. It's a title that, at most companies, evokes images of a beige office, binders full of regulations, and tedious annual seminars on data privacy. It's meant to be the company's internal affairs department, its conscience, its brakes. At Grayvale, under my father's leadership, it was intended to be a rubber stamp, a department that exists on an org chart to satisfy regulators and investors, but which ultimately wields no real power. This was their first and most significant miscalculation. They don't understand what I do. My father sees my department as an administrative cost center. Helene sees me as a glorified clerk, someone to manage the boring paperwork she can't be bothered with. They let me build my world in the company's plumbing because they never thought to look down. They were too busy posing for the cameras on the upper decks. My domain is the contractual nervous system of the company. I don't just review contracts. I write them. I don't just manage risk. I define it. My work is the green bond issuance. I was the one who spent months in negotiation with the underwriters, the ratings agencies, and the institutional investors. And I was the one who drafted, argued for, and successfully embedded the ethics covenants. They are my specialty. Most contracts have material adverse change clauses tied to finances, a sudden drop in revenue, a lost market, a catastrophic lawsuit. My clauses are different. I tie them to events. I create triggers. I write code. But in the language of the law, I build if-then statements that can't be debugged or patched. If this happens, then this is the non-negotiable consequence. Inside the Grayvale Tower, I have a reputation. I know what they call me when I leave a meeting. The emotionless machine, the ice queen, the actuary. I've heard it all. Whispered in hallways, or slipped into Slack channels I'm not meant to see. I have never once corrected them. I have, in fact, cultivated this persona. I am always prepared. My memos are precise. My presentations are data-driven and devoid of sentiment. I am punctual, reliable, and utterly predictably boring. I let them think I am a machine because machines are not a threat. They are tools. They don't have feelings. They don't get angry, and they certainly don't seek revenge. They just execute their programming. This armor of perceived emotional detachment gave me the one thing I needed most, to be left alone. It gave me the space and the autonomy to work, unnoticed, on the real architecture of the company. While Helene was busy choosing the shade of beige for the new executive lounge, I was busy laying tripwires. My primary project for the last 2 years has been a complete overhaul of Grayvale's data preservation and incident response protocols. On paper, it was a routine update to align with new SEC guidance on digital records. In practice, it was the construction of a net. First, I rewrote the definition of records material. It no longer just applied to emails, financial statements, and HR complaints. My new definition, ratified by the board in a dull consent agenda vote last winter, now includes all audiovisual or digital recordings captured on or adjacent to company property, or at any company-sponsored event or engagement that document a potential violation of the corporate ethics code. Regardless of the employment status of the individuals involved, this language is critical. It explicitly categorizes any video of violence, like the one from the Stonebridge Grill, not as a private matter but as a core corporate records material, subject to a mandatory, non-deletable legal hold. Second, I handled the vendor contracts myself. Stonebridge Grill is not just a restaurant my father likes, it's a Tier 1 preferred corporate vendor. I personally negotiated that agreement. I sat with their general manager and our procurement team, tucked into Section 8, Data Services and Security. I had them add a subclause. In exchange for Grayvale guaranteeing a minimum quarterly spend, which I knew my father and Helene would meet with their endless healing brunches and schmoozing dinners. The restaurant agreed to a 90-day rolling retention policy on all high-definition CCTV footage for any area frequented by our corporate accounts. They saw it as a minor data storage cost. I saw it as a non-negotiable asset. Third, I retrained our internal security and IT response teams. I held the seminars myself. I taught them to move beyond being just guards and technicians and to become incident documentation specialists. Their new protocol, which I wrote, mandates that any incident report, especially one involving a key person, must be logged with precise timestamps, a list of all known independent witnesses, like the waiter, the manager, and a secure chain of custody transfer for all related digital evidence. They are trained to log, not to interpret, not to make judgments, just to create the record. Fourth, the automation. In our compliance software, I built a specific workflow. I created a set of pre-drafted, encrypted legal notices. The most important one is the litigation hold notice. It's not a template I have to fill out. It's a loaded weapon. The email is already written, addressed to the legal departments of our vendors, our insurers, and our outside counsel. It cites the specific clauses in our agreements that compel them to preserve all data. All it requires is a single action from me: to create and tag a new incident. The moment I create the event file, say iMac Helene 225117, and link it to the integrity breach protocol, the system will ask me one question: execute hold? The moment I click yes, the emails are sent. They are time-stamped, encrypted, and become a matter of permanent, uneditable record. The entire legal preservation process begins automatically, a cascade of consequences set in motion before Helene has even finished her dessert. Finally, there is the insurance. This was my most delicate and important piece of work. I personally managed the renewal of our directors and officers, D&O, liability insurance. I argued successfully that, given our new commitment to ESG, we needed a special ethics and integrity rider. I found an underwriter in London who specialized in it. The rider is expensive, but I sold it to the board as a best-in-class shield against reputational risk. What I didn't heavily advertise in my presentation was the rider's most powerful clause, one I helped draft. It states that if a covered integrity incident, which my new policy now clearly defines, is triggered by a named executive or related party, the insurance policy is only valid if the company takes immediate and decisive steps to contain the liability. This, the clause specifies, includes the immediate suspension of the implicated party from all positions of influence and fiduciary control, pending an independent investigation. This clause is the masterstroke. It takes the power to suspend Helene and my father completely out of the board's hands. It's no longer a difficult, emotional decision for them. It's a simple, financial one, if they don't suspend them. The D&O insurance, the policy that protects their personal bank accounts from shareholder lawsuits, is voided. It aligns their self-interest perfectly with my objective. I do not want to meet Helene's violence with more violence. I am not interested in a screaming match in a parking garage. I don't want to throw a wine glass or ruin a dinner. That is their world. It is small and loud, and ultimately, ineffective. I want something cleaner. I want the truth to function like a light switch. I want the facts, the video file from the camera, the audio file from my watch, the digital receipt from the corporate card, the medical report I will get tonight for my cheek, to be inserted into the system I built. And I want that system to execute its programming, precisely as it was designed. I don't want a messy public fight. I want a quiet, procedural execution. The wiring has been in place for months, every contract signed, every server configured, every policy ratified. The switch was just waiting, live and silent in the wall. Tonight, Helene's hand, slick with perfume and rage, reached out in the warm yellow light of the Stonebridge Grill, and she flipped it. The Green Bond Offering Circular is a 412-page document of dense, single-space type, It is a monument to financial tedium, a contractual behemoth designed to be read by lawyers and ratings agencies, not by executives. It is, by its very nature, a hiding place, and buried deep within its appendices. On page 387, under the uninspiring heading, Covenants and Undertakings, lies section 14.6. It is titled, simply, Integrity Material Adverse Change, Integrity MAC. It is my masterpiece. It is not a standard clause. A typical MAC clause allows a party to back out of a deal if the company's financial health fundamentally deteriorates. My clause is different. It is not tied to assets or revenue streams. It is tied to behavior. Section 14.6, subsection A, defines the trigger event. It is not triggered by an accusation. It is not triggered by a lawsuit. It is triggered by the formal internal verification of a single verifiable event of public-facing violence, harassment, or moral turpitude, perpetrated by a key person or an influential related party, which, in the judgment of the independent members of the board or the bond underwriters, constitutes a significant and immediate risk to the company's reputation, public goodwill, or the successful marketing of its ESG-related financial instruments. Subsection A clarifies verifiable event. It is defined as any such incident that is documented by clear audio-visual recording, independent third-party witness testimony, or a formal medical or law enforcement report. The language is a scalpel, not a pattern of behavior, a single event, not in a private setting, public-facing, not an allegation, verifiable recording. The moment I log the incident file with the attached evidence, the CCTV footage from Stonebridge, the audio from my watch, the medical report I procured from an urgent care clinic at 10:00 p.m. last night, the clock starts, the mechanism engages. The consequences are not recommendations. They are automatic, contractual obligations. First, per 14.6b, I. The immediate temporary suspension of any key person, my father, the CEO, from all decision-making authority related to the event, its investigation, its potential public disclosure, and any personnel actions related to the involved parties. It doesn't strip him of his CEO title, not yet. It simply, cleanly, and legally severs his ability to protect her. He is walled off, muzzled by the very contract he signed to get his money. Second, 14.6b2, the immediate convocation of the Independent Ethics Committee, a body I established in the new corporate charter, composed of the 3 independent board directors. This committee is granted sole authority over the investigation. Third, 14.6c, the automatic release of the Integrity Investigation Escrow. This is a $250,000 line item I buried in the bond's administrative budget. It's pre-funded, sitting in a locked account, untouchable. The trigger of 14.6c is the key that unlocks it. These funds are designated exclusively for the hiring of a pre-vetted, third-party forensic auditing firm, a firm that reports only to the new Ethics Committee, not to my father, not to the General Counsel, and not to me. Fourth, 14.6d. This same trigger grants that auditing firm unfettered Level 7 administrative access to all relevant corporate data. This includes emails, server logs, calendars, expense reports, and all communications from the influential related party. Helene's entire digital footprint at Grayvale is now an open book. These 4 steps are the primary mechanism, but the delivery system is just as critical. The instant I formally tag the incident in the compliance portal and hit execute, the system is programmed to perform a quadruple notification. 4 encrypted, simultaneous data packets are sent. 1, to the lead underwriter in Zurich, who is now contractually obligated to review the situation. 2, to the bond counsel, the external law firm that must advise the board of its legal jeopardy. 3, to the forensic auditing firm, along with the wire instructions for their retainer from the escrow account. 4, to the personal, non-corporate email addresses of the 3 independent board directors who form the Ethics Committee. There is no way to stop the signal. There is no way for my father to handle it internally. There is no way for the General Counsel to slow it down. The bomb is not just lit. It has been delivered to 4 separate doorsteps simultaneously. Then, there is the shield. Section 14.6e, the NDA carve-out. It explicitly states that no existing or future non-disclosure agreement, settlement, or employment contract shall be construed to prohibit, penalize, or otherwise obstruct any individual from reporting a verifiable 14.6a event, or any matter of personal safety or public corporate ethics, to the Ethics Committee or relevant authorities. This sentence legally neuters Helene's primary weapon of intimidation. Her threats of, "I will destroy you," are now just hot, empty air. My testimony is protected. The waiter's testimony is protected. Anyone else she's ever threatened is, by extension, protected. Finally, there is the escape hatch. I had to give them one. A clause this aggressive would never have been approved without a cure period. Section 14.6f. The 72-hour cure. The accused party has exactly 72 hours from the time of the trigger to forensically disprove the evidence. The burden of proof is on them. They cannot argue context. They cannot claim it was a misunderstanding. They cannot say she's trying her best. They must prove, with verifiable, forensic evidence, that the video was fabricated, the audio was doctored, the medical report was fraudulent, and the witnesses were lying. It's an impossible standard, and the short timeline is designed to maximize panic and prevent them from concocting a coherent, PR-driven strategy. Helene, of course, never read this, but she didn't have to. She was already in the trap, in Annex C. Defined parties. I made sure of it. Alongside the CEO, CFO, and COO, there is a section for influential related parties. It lists her by name. Helene Dubois Quinn, in her capacity as spouse of the CEO and under her contractual role as Chief Corporate Culture Advisor, with signatory power over the Greyvale Cares Philanthropic Fund and designated access to corporate media channels, her vanity title, the very contract she demanded to give her power, is the exact legal chain I used to bind her to this clause. I remember the day it passed, 8 months ago, the 28th floor boardroom. I was on slide 94 of a 120-slide presentation. The air was stale. My father was checking his watch, clearly thinking about his golf game. The independent directors were nodding along, their eyes glassy. "And this section?" I said, my voice a monotone, "is our Enhanced Integrity MAC, a best-in-class provision that protects our ESG rating from non-financial, reputational risk. It's considered market-leading." One of the directors, a man who ran a lumber company, grunted. "Standard stuff. Mara, just tighter?" "Exactly," I said. "Standard concepts, just tighter execution, aligns us with top-tier governance." Fine, my father said, waving his hand. "Let's move to the vote. All in favor?" A chorus of ayes, the sound of a gavel. It was minuted. It was done. They never read the appendices. They never read the definitions. They were bored, and they were arrogant, and they were in a hurry. They trusted that I was the emotionless machine, the good daughter, the reliable cog. They didn't read the words. I did. I read every letter, every comma, every period, because I wrote them, and I wrote them for a night exactly like last night. The moment the door of my car closed, the hushed leather interior became my command center. The throbbing in my cheek was a metronome, counting down the seconds I had to act before they could react. I didn't drive home. I drove to a quiet, well-lit street 2 blocks away from the restaurant, pulled to the curb, and retrieved the encrypted laptop from my briefcase. The city lights of Marrow Creek blurred into streaks outside the window. Inside, there was only the cold glow of the screen. My first action, executed at 8:17 p.m., was the litigation hold. I didn't use a template. I typed the notice from scratch, the legal language flowing from my fingers as easily as breathing. It was addressed to the general counsel of the restaurant's parent company, a man I'd met once at a corporate luncheon. The notice was polite, firm, and legally ironclad. It commanded the preservation of not just the CCTV footage from the private dining room, but all footage from all cameras on the premises from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. It also demanded the preservation of all digital door lock logs for the room, all point-of-sale data, and the signed credit card receipt. I attached a copy of Section 8 of our corporate vendor agreement, highlighting the relevant clause. I hit send. An indelible record of their legal obligation was now on their servers. Next, I logged into the Grayvale compliance portal. The interface was a stark, utilitarian design of my own creation. I navigated to the Incident Management tab. A single button read, Create New Incident. I clicked it. A form appeared. Incident type. I selected Integrity Breach, 14.6 from the drop-down menu, Date of Incident, 2025, 10 to 17. Time of Incident, approx. 1942, CST. Parties involved. I typed Helene Dubois Quinn and Mara Quinn. Brief description. Physical assault by influential related party against Chief Compliance Counsel during a sanctioned corporate dinner. I created the incident file, and the system assigned it a number. iMac Helene, 2002-5101 unseen. A new screen appeared. A simple, stark dialog box with 2 buttons. It was the system's final checkpoint. Incident iMac Helene, 2025-101 has been created. Do you wish to execute automated notifications per clause 14.6? I clicked yes. There was no fanfare, no confirmation email, just a quiet log entry that appeared at the bottom of the screen at 8:24 p.m. Notification Protocol 14.6D executed. In that silent, digital instant, 4 encrypted packets of information had been fired across the globe. An underwriter in Zurich, a bond lawyer in New York, an auditing firm in Chicago, and 3 board members on their private yachts or in their country homes had just received a digital bomb on their BlackBerries. The subject line was the same on all of them. Urgent. Integrity Mac Review initiated. Grayvale Systems. The fuse was lit. My next stop was not home. It was a 24-hour private urgent care clinic in a discreet medical park at the edge of the city. I paid in cash. The doctor on duty, a tired-looking man named Evans, listened to my fabricated story about tripping and falling against a doorframe. He didn't seem to believe me, but he wasn't paid to be a detective. He was paid to document. He noted the precise size and location of the contusion, the broken skin inside my lip, the swelling. He took high-resolution digital photographs, which I watched him upload directly to my patient file. The timestamp on the digital photo file was 10:15 p.m. He printed a copy of the full medical report, stamped and signed it, and handed it to me. I now had a sworn, professional record of my injuries, time-stamped less than 3 hours after the event. Only then did I drive home. The apartment was cold and silent. I ignored the blinking light on my answering machine, which I knew would be my father. I plugged my watch into its dock. The sync was automatic. Within minutes, the files were on my laptop. First, the audio, a pristine WAV file, 1 minute and 32 seconds long. Helene's voice was perfectly clear. The whispered threats a stark contrast to the clatter of silverware in the background. Then, the biometric data. It showed my heart rate, a steady 72 beats per minute, spiking to 138 at exactly 19:42:12, the moment of impact. The watch's internal GPS confirmed my location within the precise coordinates of the Stonebridge Grill. Saturday morning, while my father and Helene were likely waking up to the slow-dawning horror of what I might do, I was already doing it. I called the restaurant's floor manager, Mr. Albright. My tone was one of collaborative concern. Mr. Albright, this is Mara Quinn from Grayvale. Following up on our brief chat last night, corporate security is reviewing a minor incident. For our records, would you be willing to provide a brief statement of your observations? He agreed immediately, eager to be seen as helpful. I recorded the call, with his explicit consent. As he recounted seeing Helene strike me and my subsequent request to preserve the video, I did the same with the young waiter. 2 independent witness statements, both digitally recorded and saved by 9:30 a.m. The parking lot footage was a trickier, but necessary, piece of corroboration. I remembered seeing Mark Callahan, our VP of Logistics, getting into his silver Tesla as I was walking toward the door. I called his cell. "Mark, Mara Quinn, apologies for the weekend call. A quick question. Our security team is pulling logs for a potential data breach at Stonebridge last night. Your car was parked near the main entrance. Would you be willing to authorize a data share of your Sentry Mode clips between 7:30 and 8 a.m.? It would be a great help." He didn't hesitate. "Of course. Mara, anything to help. By noon." I had a 180-degree view of myself exiting the restaurant, one hand holding my purse, the other subconsciously touching my cheek. The timestamp on the video was 8:04 p.m. That afternoon, I logged into the Marrow Creek County Court's e-filing system. I filled out the petition for an emergency protective order against Helene Dubois Quinn. In the section for evidence, I attached the scanned, signed medical report from Dr. Evans as Exhibit A, and referenced the existence of video evidence in my possession. Filing the petition made it a public record. It was no longer a corporate issue. It was now a matter for the state judiciary. With all the raw materials gathered, I began construction. I created a new, encrypted, access-controlled folder on the Secure Compliance server. I named it simply iMac Helene. Inside, I built a clean, logical structure of subfolders. Video, containing the Tesla clip and a placeholder for the forthcoming CCTV. Audio, containing the watch recording. Witnesses, containing the 2 recorded statements. Medical, containing the report and photos from Dr. Evans. Legal, containing a copy of the court petition. Each file was named with a rigid, systematic convention. Evidence type, source date, timestamp, extension. It was a perfect, unassailable digital case file. My final step on Saturday was to log into Grayvale's HR portal. I navigated to the whistleblower section, a system I had designed to provide maximum legal protection. I filed a formal workplace violence and safety incident report. I named Helene as the perpetrator and myself as the victim. I described the event in cold, factual detail by using the official whistleblower channel. I had just wrapped myself, and my evidence, in a thick blanket of federal and state anti-retaliation laws. Any move they made against me now would be a separate, and very serious, crime. I spent Sunday in silence, watching the digital breadcrumbs. The portal showed me that all 4 automated emails had been opened within 2 hours of being sent. I saw logs showing 2 of the independent directors had accessed the corporate charter section on the ethics committee. They were reading the rules. They were preparing. At 7 p.m. on Sunday evening, I sent one last email. It was addressed to the 3 independent directors, with the general counsel and the bond counsel CC'd. Subject: Emergency meeting of the Independent Ethics Committee. Time: 9:00 a.m. Monday, October 20th. Location: Boardroom 28A. Agenda: Formal review of a triggering event under Clause 14.6 of the Green Bond Offering Circular. A complete data package will be presented at the meeting. I did not ask if they were available. I told them when and where we would meet. The chain of evidence was forged, link by link. It started on a ceiling in a restaurant, and by Monday morning, it was ready to be presented on the 28th floor, one step away from the trading desks that would decide the fate of my father's company. The 38 hours between sending the meeting request and walking into that boardroom were a masterclass in corporate panic. The digital hive I had poked was now buzzing, furious and terrified. The old Grayvale machine, the one built on denial, PR spin, and quiet threats, began to whir, trying desperately to follow its outdated programming. The first call came at 7:19 p.m. on Sunday, barely 20 minutes after I had set the meeting. It was my father. His caller ID flashed on my screen, a name I associated more with shareholder reports than family. I let it ring 3 times, then answered with my standard, professional greeting. "This is Mara." Mara. His voice was tight, strained, the forced bonhomie gone. I just got a preposterous email from Jim Anders. An emergency ethics meeting? What in God's name are you doing? I am following the procedures outlined in the bond circular, as is my duty, I said, my voice even. A heavy sigh on his end, the sound of a man bracing himself. Listen to me. You cannot do this. This is a billion-dollar deal. This is the company. Helene. God. Mara. She's under a tremendous amount of pressure. The gala, the bond launch. She's just trying her best. Trying her best. The familiar hollow absolution. The pressure she is under is not a legal defense for assault, nor is it a mitigating factor under 14.6, I said. This is not about 14.6. This is about family. You are blowing a private disagreement into a corporate crisis. I am telling you, as your father and as your CEO, to stand down, cancel the meeting. I am unable to do that, I said. The notification has been sent to the underwriters. It's out of my hands. I will see you at 9:00 a.m. I disconnected the call before he could reply. 2 minutes later, my phone lit up with a text message. From Helene. You think you're smart. You're a child. If you go through with this, I will tell every person on that board, every reporter I know, that you are psychologically unstable. I will tell them you've had a breakdown. I will say you attacked me and that I had to defend myself. Who do you think they'll believe? I held my thumb over the message, taking a high-resolution screenshot. I saved the image to the iMac Helene file, subfolder, Communications, naming it Text, Helene, 2025-1019, 1924. I did not reply. The threat, now documented, was just another piece of evidence. The next attempt came at 8:00 a.m. Monday. 1 hour before the meeting, it was not a call, but a summons. Our general counsel, David Roth, appeared at my office door. He was a tall, perpetually harried man whose entire career was built on making my father's problems disappear. He closed the door behind him, his face pale. Mara, he said, skipping the pleasantries, we have a situation. Yes, we do, I said, continuing to arrange my files. He sat, uninvited, in the chair opposite my desk. This meeting cannot happen as scheduled. We need to contain this, what you've done. Invoking 14.6. It's a nuclear option. The underwriters are already demanding a full report. This could reprice the entire bond, if not kill it. The trigger event occurred. I reported the trigger. I am now presenting the evidence. That is the protocol, I said, not looking up. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Let's be practical. This is a family matter that spilled over. It's messy. It's ugly. But it's not a material adverse change. Not really. He slid a single piece of paper across my desk. It was a draft, separation and general release agreement. This is a proposal, a significant one, a lump sum payment, 6 figures, an enhanced title at a subsidiary. You sign this. You agree this was all a private misunderstanding, and we make this go away. We give a joint statement. We all move on. I looked at the paper. It was a hush agreement. A bribe. I took a red pen from my desk cup and wrote in neat block letters across the top. Rejected, not responsive to incident report. I slid it back to him. David, I said, finally meeting his eyes. This document is an attempt to silence a whistleblower and conceal a 14.6 event. I am adding it to the evidence file for the committee. You should probably get your own lawyer. His face went from pale to ashen. He stood, took the paper, and left without another word. As he was leaving, my phone buzzed with a private message on Signal. The encrypted app I used. It was from Jim Anders, the independent director, the one who ran the lumber company, the one who had grunted standard stuff in the meeting. The message was one sentence. I've read the charter. I've read the clause. I will be there. You are not alone. I read it, deleted it, and felt something. It was an unfamiliar data point. I filed it away and refocused. The internal machine was now in full-blown panic. An email arrived from the head of HR, CCing David Roth. Subject: Your incident report, WVS 19004. It stated that after a preliminary review, my complaint was being recategorized from workplace violence to interpersonal family dispute and would be handled by the Executive Mediation Service. They were trying to bury it in a bureaucratic black hole. I hit reply all. Per my obligations under SEC Rule 21F17 and the Grayvale Whistleblower Protection Policy, which you will find attached, any attempt to recategorize, impede, or mediate a formal report of violence linked to a 14.6 MAC event is considered material retaliation. I advise you to preserve my original filing as is and await instruction from the Independent Ethics Committee. This email will also be forwarded to them. I attached the relevant sections of the policies I had written. The PR department was next. A draft press release landed in my inbox, marked urgent, for review. Grayvale Systems confirmed today that a minor personal conflict between members of the Quinn family occurred at a private dinner. The matter is unrelated to company operations, has been amicably resolved, and will have no impact on the forthcoming green bond issuance. I opened the document, typed one note in the comments. Not approved. This statement is factually inaccurate and constitutes a misleading disclosure to investors. I sent it back. The desperation was escalating. At 8:40 a.m., my screen flashed with an incoming video call. From Helene, I answered, but left my own camera off. Her face appeared, grainy and frantic. She was in her dressing room at home, wearing a silk robe, her hair a mess. The serene mask was gone. Mara, thank God. Graham says you won't listen. Listen to me. We can fix this, she said, her voice a strained, false, intimate whisper. You come here, right now. We'll go to the office together. We'll take a picture. Me and you, hugging. We'll tell them it was a misunderstanding. I'll say I was just passionate. You know how I get. We can post it online. It'll all go away before 9. She was offering me the one thing she knew, a photo op, a lie to paint over the truth. Helene, I said, my voice as cold and clear as the glass of water on my desk. This conversation is being recorded as potential evidence. Are your legal counsel present? She stared, uncomprehending. What, lawyer? I'm trying to help us. You stupid girl! Then I have nothing more to say to you. I ended the call. At 8:51 a.m., 9 minutes before the meeting, my father called one last time. I let the call record. Mara, I am begging you, as your father, for the last time, call this off. She's trying her best. The repetition of the phrase was like a hammer on a nail. It sealed everything. I know, I said, and my voice was calm, almost gentle. And I am trying my best, too. I'm trying my best to do my job, and to enforce the exact clause that you signed. I hung up, picked up my encrypted laptop and the single slim leather folder containing the printed evidence, and walked out of my office. It was time. At precisely 9 o'clock a.m., the automatic door to boardroom 28A slid open. The room was a sterile cube of glass and steel, suspended 28 floors above the city. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Vale River snaked below, a sluggish, muddy brown artery. The air was cool and still, smelling of nothing but filtered air and expensive carpet. They were all there, seated around the vast black granite table that felt as cold as a tombstone. Jim Anders, the lumber director, gave me a curt, almost imperceptible nod. Beside him sat the other 2 independent directors, Eleanor Vance, a retired tech CFO with a reputation for merciless scrutiny, and Marcus Thorne, a former university president who specialized in institutional ethics. They were the ethics committee. Also present were 2 senior representatives from the Zurich underwriting firm, flown in overnight. Their faces were grim, impassive masks. Beside them was the lead bond counsel from New York, a woman named Chen, whose presence alone signaled the gravity of the situation. At the far end of the table sat David Roth, our general counsel, looking as if he hadn't slept in a week. The seat at the head of the table, my father's seat, was empty. So was the one beside it. I took my place at the opposite end, the designated presenter's spot. I opened my laptop and connected it to the room's main screen. The only sound was the quiet click of the cable locking into place. "Thank you all for attending," I began, my voice steady, amplified slightly by the room's hidden microphones. At 8:24 p.m. on Friday, October 17th, I initiated the protocol under Clause 14.6 of the Green Bond Offering Circular, following a verifiable trigger event. This meeting is to present the initial evidence package to the Independent Ethics Committee for their determination. I did not offer context. I did not speak of family or feelings. I presented the facts as a series of exhibits. Exhibit A, a litigation hold notice, sent to the Stonebridge Grill at 8:17 p.m., Friday. The email appeared on the screen, its time-stamped header a stark, digital fact. Exhibit B, the signed corporate credit card receipt from the dinner, establishing the event as official company business. I moved methodically through the chain. The audio file from my watch. I played only 10 seconds, just enough to hear Helene's clear, whispered threat. "I will destroy you, you little bitch." The room was utterly silent. I showed them the biometric data graph, the red line of my heart rate jumping from a placid 72 to 138 in a single second. "Exhibit F," I said, "is the signed and stamped medical report from a licensed physician, documenting the nature of my injuries at 10:15 p.m., approximately 2.5 hours after the incident. The clinical photos of the bruise on my cheekbone and the laceration inside my lip filled the 80-inch screen. The Zurich bankers exchanged a single, sharp glance. And finally, Exhibit G, the primary evidence. I clicked the file. CCTV, Stonebridge, Room 3, 2025-101. This footage was delivered by bonded courier this morning at 7:00 a.m. in response to the litigation hold. I stated, "What you are about to see is the raw, unedited feed from the camera in the private dining room." I pressed play. The silent color video appeared. It showed the three of us at the table. It showed the waiter approaching. It showed him leaning in. And then, in one shockingly swift motion, Helene's arm moving. The video captured my head snapping to the side, the waiter freezing in disbelief. My father's half-hearted gesture. It was all there, clear and undeniable under the warm, yellow restaurant lighting. When the clip ended, a profound silence settled over the room. It was broken by Eleanor Vance. "Mr. Roth," she said, her voice like chipping ice. "Are Mr. and Miss Quinn in the building?" David Roth swallowed. "Yes, they are in the adjacent conference room." "Bring them in," she commanded. 2 minutes later, the door slid open again. My father entered first, his face a mask of weary anger. Helene followed, dressed in a severe navy blue suit, her expression one of indignant fury. They were not invited to sit. They stood in the middle of the room, looking like defendants in a silent, glass courtroom. "Helene," Eleanor said, her tone devoid of any warmth. "We have just reviewed footage from Friday night. Do you have anything to say?" Helene tossed her head back, a gesture of pure defiance. "This is absurd. It was a heated family discussion. I made a gesture, a strong gesture, perhaps, but it was nothing more. Mara is being hysterical and vindictive. She is trying to sabotage this deal because she's unstable." "A gesture," Eleanor repeated, her voice flat. She looked at me. "Ms. Quinn, please play the last 10 seconds of the video again, at 25% speed." I moved the cursor and clicked. The scene replayed in ghastly slow motion. The screen showed Helene's hand drawing back. It showed the elbow striking my ribs, the ripple effect visible through the fabric of my blouse. Then, her palm, fingers slightly curled, arcing across the table. It showed the moment of impact, my skin depressing under the force, my hair flying back. It showed my head snapping sideways with a violence that was purely mechanical. The second strike, a backhand, was just as clear. Two distinct, brutal impacts. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Helene's face had paled, her mask of defiance cracking. My father stared at the floor, unable to watch the screen. The bond counsel, Ms. Chen, finally spoke. She did not look at my father or Helene. She addressed the three directors. "Under the terms of the agreement," she said, her voice crisp and precise. "The evidence presented appears to unequivocally constitute a trigger event as defined in Section 14.6. As bond counsel, we are advising you that failure to act on this trigger, as per the specified protocol, would be considered a material breach of the offering covenants. The underwriters would be within their rights to withdraw. We require the immediate, formal activation of the Independent Ethics Committee and the execution of all consequences outlined in 14.6b. It was a legal kill shot. She had just informed the board that their only choice was to follow my rules. My father finally looked up, his eyes pleading. He didn't look at the directors. He looked at me. "Mara, this is a family," he choked out, his voice thick. "This is our family." It was Jim Anders who answered, his voice a low rumble. "Graham, we are not a family. We are a publicly traded in-spirit corporation with thousands of employees and their families who depend on us to have a functioning, ethical leadership. We are protecting them." The distinction hung in the air, sharp and final. The line had been drawn. I stood and placed a single slim folder on the table in front of Jim. "For the committee's records," I said, "this is a copy of the emergency protective order I filed with the Marrow Creek County Court on Saturday. It was signed by a judge this morning at 8:30 a.m. It legally prohibits Helene Dubois Quinn from approaching me, my residence, or my place of work, which is this building." David Roth audibly gasped. Helene stared at me, her eyes filled with a new kind of emotion, pure, unadulterated hatred, mixed with the dawning horror of utter powerlessness. Eleanor Vance looked at her two fellow directors. "The committee must vote. All in favor of formally activating the Integrity MAC protocol?" Jim Anders raised his hand immediately. "Aye," Marcus Thorne followed. "Aye." Eleanor Vance raised hers last. "Aye. The vote is unanimous. The protocol is active as of 9:21 a.m. She then looked at the bond counsel. "Please inform the underwriters and activate the escrow for the forensic auditors." She turned to David Roth. "Mr. Roth, you will formally notify the CEO that his decision-making authority in all matters of PR, HR, and internal investigation is suspended, pending our review. All such matters will now be directed through this committee." My father swayed slightly, as if he'd been physically struck. They had done it. They had followed the flowchart. The machine I had built was working perfectly. I looked from my father's broken expression to Helene's venomous glare. I looked at the grim, determined faces of the committee, and I looked at the muddy river outside, flowing on, indifferent. I gathered my things. As I walked toward the door, I paused and turned back to the room. "From now on," I said, my voice clear and carrying in the sudden, absolute silence. "Silence is no longer an option." The glass door slid closed behind me with a soft, final hiss. The vote in the boardroom was not an end. It was a trigger. The activation of the Integrity MAC was like turning a digital key. The $250,000 in the escrow account was released with an automated wire transfer at 9:22 a.m. By 9:45 a.m., the forensic auditing firm, Kroll and Associates, a name that made even the most hardened CFOs nervous, had accepted the engagement. By 11:00 a.m., a team of 3 auditors, led by a man named Arthur Hayes, was walking into the Grayvale building with a court order and a letter of engagement from the Independent Ethics Committee. They were granted the Level 7 administrative access I had built into the system. They did not start with my father. They did not start with the C-suite. They started with the target designated by the protocol, Helene Dubois Quinn. Arthur Hayes was a man who moved without wasted motion. He didn't care about the family drama, the assault, or the personalities involved. He was a bloodhound who followed the scent of money. His first stop was the digital ledger for the Greyvale Cares Foundation, the philanthropic fund that served as Helene's personal fiefdom. For the first few hours, the audit seemed routine. Donations to the Arts Center, sponsorships for charity galas, a new wing for the local hospital. It was all pristine. Exactly the kind of reputation laundering a corporation like Greyvale would engage in. But Hayes was looking for anomalies, and he found one in a recurring, six-figure quarterly payment to a boutique PR firm in Los Angeles called Aura Communications. The invoices were models of vagueness: reputation management services, crisis mitigation consulting, proactive brand stewardship. These were red flags. Using his administrative access, Hayes cross-referenced the invoice dates with Helene's corporate email account. He ran a simple keyword search: Aura. The results were a digital confession. Helene, it turned out, used Greyvale Cares as her own private Black Ops budget. Aura Communications was not a traditional PR firm. They were, in their own words, from an email to Helene, digital narrative specialists. They specialized in suppressing negative stories. Whenever an internal complaint at Greyvale started to gain traction, an engineer in the ag tech division raising safety concerns, a female sales associate filing an HR complaint for harassment, Helene would deploy Aura. Their strategy was insidious. They would hire a network of social media influencers, bloggers, and freelance journalists, key opinion leaders, or KOLs, to flood the internet with a tidal wave of positive, generic Greyvale content. A story about a new company daycare center, a profile on a woman in tech, handpicked by Helene, a gushing article about Greyvale's commitment to sustainability. The stories were designed to dominate search engine results, pushing any negative keywords or employee complaints so far down the page they effectively ceased to exist. She wasn't solving problems. She was burying them under a mountain of sponsored content. This was unethical, but the next discovery was criminal. Hayes found an email chain between Helene and Greyvale's CFO. In it, Helene provided explicit instructions. The invoices from Aura Communications, she directed, were to be internally coded not to the charitable fund's ledger, but to the budget for the Green Bond Marketing Initiative. The subject line of the email was, "With breathtaking arrogance, aligning our messaging." This was the smoking gun. It was wire fraud. Plain and simple. She was taking money meant for charity, using it to silence internal dissent, and then fraudulently billing it to the very ESG bond that was supposed to represent the company's new era of transparency. The money raised on the promise of social and environmental governance was being used to cover up Greyvale's social and governance failures. The audit team dug deeper. They found the file for the female sales associate. She had been on the verge of filing a lawsuit, but she'd been silenced. Not with a traditional NDA, which might have drawn legal scrutiny, but with a bizarrely generous mental health and wellness consulting agreement. She was paid $150,000, not from Greyvale's legal settlement fund, but directly from Greyvale Cares, in exchange for providing consulting services on corporate wellness. The contract contained a non-disparagement clause so broad it effectively gagged her for life. At 4 p.m. that same day, Arthur Hayes presented his preliminary findings to the Ethics Committee in a closed-door emergency session. He laid it out in cold, emotionless terms: systematic misappropriation of charitable funds, fraudulent accounting practices, and a direct material breach of the ESG covenants of the bond offering. The video of Helene striking me had been the key that opened the door, but what Hayes found inside was a powder keg. My personal grievance had just been eclipsed by a massive corporate conspiracy. The assault was a violation of ethics. The fund was a violation of federal law. Eleanor Vance, as chair of the committee, made the obligatory call to the underwriters in Zurich. The response was instantaneous and brutal. A deal predicated on trust had been revealed as a sham. The lead underwriter's voice, crackling over the speakerphone in the boardroom, was arctic. "This is a complete and total breach of faith. The offering is suspended indefinitely. We will not proceed until there is a fundamental, verifiable, and permanent change in leadership and a complete forensic audit of the entire corporate structure. The news hit the 28th floor like a shockwave. My father's billion-dollar deal, his crowning legacy, had just evaporated. He tried to fight. He convened a meeting with the ethics committee and the lawyers. He stormed in, his face flushed with rage and desperation. "This is a witch hunt," he bellowed. "Helene was protecting the company. She was managing our reputation, which is her job. These are aggressive tactics, yes, but they were done in the best interest of Greyvale." He was defending the indefensible, trying to frame fraud as a form of loyalty. Jim Anders listened patiently, his hands steepled in front of him. When my father finally ran out of steam, Jim spoke, his voice calm but unyielding. "Graham, the issue is no longer the assault. The issue is that the chief corporate culture advisor, with the apparent complicity of the CFO, has been running a secret, fraudulent slush fund to deceive investors. The underwriters are gone. The bond is dead. We have a crisis of leadership." "I can fix this," my father insisted, his voice cracking. "I will fire the CFO. I will handle Helene." "I don't think you can," Jim said quietly. "You are too close to it. Your judgment is compromised. The board has a fiduciary duty to the shareholders, and that duty now requires us to insulate the company from this. Therefore, I am formally proposing a vote of no confidence in the current CEO and a motion to immediately appoint an interim CEO to manage this crisis." The room fell into a stunned silence. This was the final, unthinkable step. The company my father had built was being taken from him. He looked around the room, his eyes wild, searching for an ally. He found none. He looked at me. Standing by the door where I had been asked to wait, my expression was neutral. Before the chaos could erupt, I stepped forward. I placed a slim 10-page document on the table in front of Jim Anders. "This might be helpful," I said. "It's a proposed 30-day compliance restoration and transparency protocol." They stared at me, then at the document. Eleanor Vance picked it up. Its title was printed in a simple, bold font at the top. "I have outlined a series of immediate, actionable steps," I explained, my voice cutting through the tension. "Step 1. Immediately freeze all assets and expenditures of the Greyvale Cares Fund. Step 2. Expand the mandate of the independent auditors to cover all executive-level spending for the last 3 years. Step 3. Establish a restitution program for any employees identified as having been silenced by fraudulent contracts. Step 4. Create a new, truly independent governance board for the fund, with a permanent seat for an employee representative. This plan, if executed immediately, can be presented to the underwriters as a sign of decisive action." I had not come to the meeting just to watch the company burn. I had come with a fire extinguisher and a blueprint for a new, fireproof building. The room was utterly still. My father stared at me, a look of complete and utter betrayal on his face. He had thought this was about a slap. He had never imagined it was about everything else. Eleanor Vance finished scanning the first page of my plan. She looked up at Jim Anders, then at Marcus Thorne. She didn't say a word. She just gave a single, decisive nod. The silent, suffocating weight of an impending vote fell over the room. The vote was not a debate. It was a formality, an execution. Eleanor Vance called the question with the finality of a judge passing sentence. "The motion before the committee," she announced, "is threefold. 1. To temporarily suspend Graham Quinn from his duties as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. 2. To permanently bar Helene Dubois Quinn from all company premises and revoke her corporate credentials. 3. To appoint Mara Quinn as Interim Chief Ethics Officer, reporting directly and exclusively to this committee, and to empower her to execute the 30-day compliance restoration protocol she has submitted. We will vote on all 3 measures as a single resolution. All in favor?" Jim Anders. Aye. Marcus Thorne. Aye. Eleanor Vance. Aye. The lead underwriter from Zurich, who held a non-voting but influential seat at the table. "Our firm is in favor." The bond counsel. looking at David Roth. "We advise in the affirmative. David Roth, our general counsel, seeing the absolute ruin of any other choice, finally capitulated. "I," he whispered, "a man surrendering." That was 6, my father, who was still technically a voting member of the board until the gavel fell, stared at the black granite. "Nay," he said, his voice a ghost. "The resolution passes, 6-1, Eleanor declared. "It is effective immediately. Meeting adjourned." The aftermath was not chaos. It was a series of precise, controlled demolitions. At 10:05 a.m., a draft Form 8K was circulated by the legal team. It is the document a company must file with the SEC to announce a material event to shareholders. This one was brutally concise. It announced the temporary suspension of the CEO, the termination of the Chief Corporate Culture Advisor, and the appointment of an interim Chief Ethics Officer to oversee an independent audit. There were no adjectives, no explanations, just the cold, hard facts of the corporate decapitation. It was sent to our private investors within the hour. At 10:30 a.m., the PR department, now under direct orders from the Ethics Committee, issued a public statement. It was the polar opposite of Helene's usual flowery prose. It was 48 words long. Greyvale Systems has initiated a comprehensive, independent review of its internal governance and the oversight of its philanthropic funds. To ensure the integrity of this process, the board has enacted leadership changes, effective immediately. Greyvale is unequivocally committed to the highest standards of corporate ethics and transparency. At 11:00 a.m., the HR department, acting on a direct order from me, sent a company-wide email. It announced the immediate establishment of a new, confidential whistleblower hotline managed by an external, independent third-party firm. The email stated, in bold type, that Greyvale's anti-retaliation policies would be strictly and vigorously enforced. It was an open invitation. The locked doors were being kicked open. The most visceral consequence happened at 11:15 a.m. 2 uniformed security guards, men I had personally trained in the new incident protocols, arrived at the door of Helene's 27th floor office. They were accompanied by a female HR representative. Their instructions were simple. Helene was to gather her personal belongings and be escorted from the building. Her network access had already been cut. Her corporate cards were deactivated. The building's internal security cameras captured the scene with silent, high-definition clarity. Helene did not scream. She did not argue. She moved with a stiff, furious energy, sweeping photos and trinkets into her designer handbag. As she was escorted down the hallway toward the executive elevator, she suddenly turned and swung the heavy bag, full of sharp-cornered picture frames, against the plate glass wall of my father's empty office. The glass didn't break. It was reinforced. But the impact left a spiderweb of cracks and a sound that, according to the security guard's report, echoed down the entire floor. They took her down the service elevator, not the main one, and out a side door. I watched a live feed of it from my desk. Upstairs, in the stunned silence of the 28th floor, my father stood alone in the center of the boardroom after everyone else had filed out. I saw him through the glass. He stood there for a long time, looking not at the view, but at his own reflection. Slowly, deliberately, he reached up to the lapel of his suit jacket and unpinned the small silver nameplate he had worn for 30 years. It read, "Graham Quinn, CEO." He didn't throw it. He didn't break it. He simply closed his fist around it and then walked out of the room, leaving the door open behind him. At 1 p.m., an email arrived from the Zurich underwriters. It was addressed to me and the 3 members of the Ethics Committee. "We have been notified of the board's decisive actions. These steps are a satisfactory demonstration of commitment to resolving the identified issues. We will resume the due diligence process for the bond offering, pending the successful completion and positive outcome of the independent audit. The deal is not dead. It is on hold, under enhanced supervision." It was the victory, clean, undeniable, contractual. My own inbox, which had been silent all morning, began to chime. First one email, then another, then a flood. They were from names I hadn't seen in years. A female engineer who had quit the AgTech division 2 years ago after her safety concerns were ignored. A sales associate from the Denver office. A logistics manager who had been forced into early retirement. The messages were all variations on the same theme. Thank you. I thought no one would ever listen. I have documents you need to see. It was so dark in there for so long. Thank you for finally turning on the lights. I didn't answer them, not yet. I created a new, secure folder. Whistleblower docs. I set up an auto-reply directing them all to the new, independent hotline. At 5 p.m., when the building was beginning to empty, I packed my briefcase. I walked past the grand, silent executive elevator. I didn't want the quiet, sterile ride down. I opened the heavy steel door to the emergency stairwell. The air inside was different. It was thick, smelling of concrete dust, faint sweat, and the oiled steel of the handrail. I began to walk down, my footsteps echoing in the enclosed space. 28 flights of stairs. With each floor I passed, I felt a layer of something shedding, the cold tension in my shoulders, the tightness in my chest, the low-level, high-frequency hum of fear that had been my constant companion for as long as I could remember. When I reached the ground floor and pushed open the heavy door into the lobby, the feeling was new. The deep, aching bruise on my cheek was still there, a dull throb, but for the first time, my hands weren't shaking. The lobby of the Greyvale Systems Tower was a cathedral of corporate power. The floors were polished Italian marble, so black and reflective they seemed to hold a distorted, upside-down version of the world, a massive, abstract steel sculpture, meant to represent data streams, hung suspended in the 4-story atrium, casting long skeletal shadows in the late afternoon sun. The light, streaming through the towering glass walls, was the color of old gold, making the dust motes dance like tiny, forgotten souls. It was a space designed to make people feel small, to impress upon them the sheer scale and permanence of the empire my father had built. But today, the permanence felt fragile, the silence not one of reverence but of shock. He was waiting for me by the main entrance, standing awkwardly beside a potted ficus that looked as out of place as he did. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket anymore, just his white shirt and tie. In his left hand, he was clutching the small, silver nameplate. His knuckles were white. The remaining employees, the ones who hadn't fled the building the moment the rumors started, scurried past, their gazes fixed on their phones, on the floor, on anything but the man who, just that morning, had been their king. He took a step toward me as I approached, his face a ruin of confusion and grief. He didn't look angry anymore. He just looked old. "You've done it," he said, his voice raspy, stripped of its usual commanding resonance. "You've actually done it. You've torn it all down. 30 years of work, our name, our legacy, all of it, burned to the ground in a single day." I stopped a few feet from him, my briefcase a small, solid weight in my hand. I said nothing. I just waited. "For what?" he pleaded, his voice cracking. "For a misunderstanding? A single, regrettable moment? Helene, she loves this company. She loves this family. She was trying so hard to hold everything together, to project the right image. She was under so much pressure." He looked down at the nameplate in his hand, then back up at me, his eyes searching my face for a flicker of the daughter he thought he knew. She was just trying her best. The words, once a shield for him, were now just a sad, empty echo. They held no power over me anymore. Trying her best is not an exemption from liability. "Dad," I said, and my voice was not cruel, just clear, like glass. "It doesn't excuse fraud. It doesn't excuse assault. It is not, and has never been, a defense. I was just doing my job." He shook his head slowly, a man refusing to understand the language of a world he no longer controlled. "Your job? Your job was to protect this company, to protect this family." "No," I said, the final distinction falling into place with perfect, cold clarity. "My job is to protect the company from this family." As if on cue, my phone vibrated in my pocket. A single, sharp buzz. I pulled it out. The screen was bright in the dimming lobby. It was an email from the lead underwriter in Zurich. The subject line was simply, Greyvale Systems Bond Offering. The body of the email contained a single, beautiful, perfect word. Proceed. It was the final gear clicking into place. The machine was now running on its own. The world of money and power, the only world my father truly respected, had just given its blessing. A young paralegal from the general counsel's office scurried toward me then, holding a slim leather folder and a pen. She looked terrified, avoiding my father's gaze completely. "Ms. Quinn," she stammered, "the committee asked me to get your signature on the final directive, the one authorizing the audit." She held it out to me. I took the folder, opened it on the smooth, cold surface of a nearby security desk, and clicked the pen. It was the document codifying my 30-day plan, the one that gave me, as interim chief ethics officer, the authority to remake the company from the ground up. My signature was a series of sharp, confident angles. I pushed the pen down, the ink a stark, black line on the crisp, white paper. When I lifted it, the act felt immense, geologic. It felt like heaving a great, carved stone into place, sealing the entrance to a tomb, a door to the past that could now never be reopened. I handed the folder back to the paralegal, who scurried away as if fleeing a blast site. I straightened up and turned toward the massive glass doors of the entrance. The low-slung, afternoon sun caught me full in the face. The light was intensely bright, and I could feel its warmth on my skin. It illuminated the bruise on my cheek, turning the deep purples and blues into a stark, visible truth. For a moment, I saw my reflection in the glass, a woman with a bruised face, standing alone in the ruins of an empire. I made no move to cover it. I wanted them to see. It was a record, a receipt. I turned and began to walk. My footsteps were the only sound in the vast, silent lobby. I walked past the reception desk, its marble surface gleaming under the spotlights. I walked past the abstract sculpture that had always seemed so meaningless and now looked like a monument to a forgotten age. I walked toward the frosted glass gates of the security turnstile. My father's voice called out behind me. One last time, thin and desperate. "Mara!" I did not stop. I did not turn around. I reached the gate and held my employee ID card up to the sensor. The gate emitted a single, clean, electronic beep and slid open. There was no need for an apology. There was no need for a final explanation. He would never understand the clauses and covenants that now bound his world, and I no longer needed him to. The work was done. The system I had built had worked. I stepped through the gate, and the last words were not for him, but for myself. A whisper so quiet, it was barely a breath. Best is not enough. The automatic glass doors slid open in front of me, revealing the noise and the light of the city beyond. I stepped out into it, and behind me, the doors slid shut with a soft, final hiss. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know your thoughts, and if you feel comfortable sharing. Comment below with where in the world you're listening from. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like, and to give it an extra boost, hit that hype button. It really helps the algorithm notice the story and share it with more listeners just like you. Thank you again for your incredible support.